All right, so now let's talk about these slash passing chords. Now, in the last chapter, I was talking about the diminished chord, and I was saying how you can have C6 up to sharp 1 diminished, and D minor up to sharp 2 diminished. We can also get that same type of effect by using triads and using an alternate bass note in the left hand, right? So, if we're on C6, right, and we want to go up to D minor, the first thing that we want to think about is we want to think about our dominant motion, okay? Now, let me pause here for a second and talk about dominant motion, and then we will go on to the slash passing chords in the next unit here, because we really want to make sure we get in that dominant motion first. Now, dominant motion, you know, when we were talking about diatonic seventh chords, I had said the 5 chord was the only dominant chord in the key. This is very important because that 5 dominant 7th chord wants to lead you to the 1 chord. So the 5-7 to 1 resolution is one of the strongest resolutions that you can have, right? Now notice what I did here was I took out, you know, the notes that I didn't need out of the chord, and I played just the 3rd and the 7th of the chord. And that resolved to the root and the 3rd of the C. Okay, so that's 5 to 1. Now, dominant motion is anytime you have that 5 to 1 resolution. Okay, so for instance, let's say I wanted to get to the D chord. What I can do is there's 2 ways in which I can think about it. One way is I can think of my D scale and I think, what's the 5th note? Well, the 5th note is A, so if I create a dominant 7th chord on A, it'll lead me to D. Now, the beauty of the dominant 7th chords and the beauty of dominant motion is that you do not have to always resolve to a major chord. In my first example, in which I was going from G to C, you know, it's going to the 1 major. But I could also resolve to a minor chord or another dominant chord. So let's say I'm in C, and I want to get over to D, you know, but I want to get to D minor, right? Because I'm in the key of C, so the D minor would normally be a 2 minor chord. So if I want to get to that D, I said I could do that A7, right? But then I resolved it to major. So let's see how it sounds if we resolve it to minor. Here we have C, just a basic triad, to A7, right? My dominant motion, getting to my D minor. Sounds beautiful, right? So you can precede, that means come before, any chord with its related dominant 7th chord. Now this is where it gets a little bit tricky. We're in the key of C, and I told you that there was only 1 dominant chord in the key of C, right? It's the 5-7 chord, which is G7, okay? But then, well, wait a second, what is this A7 chord? That's a dominant 7th chord as well. That's not in the key of C, and you'd be absolutely correct. It is not in the key of C. It is outside of the key of C, and it is non-diatonic. Anything that is outside of the key is non-diatonic. Right? So now that means that, wait a minute, I'm kind of moving outside of the key of C for a second. So is the song still in the key of C? Absolutely it is. All right? It is still in the key of C because in music, if we were limited only to those 7 diatonic chords, music would be pretty bland. All right? We would only have 7 chords to work with. All right? So what we do is we move in and out of key centers. Now, that means that, you know, here's well, here, I can take this little mouse pad here, okay? Imagine that this mouse pad is our song, right? And we have, this is all the key of C right here. But now we might pepper this with different keys. So we might throw in a little bit of the key of G, or a little bit of the key of E flat, or a little bit of the key of A, or whatnot, okay? When I did that progression right there, that's the 1 chord going to the 5-7 of 2. When I play that A7 chord, I'm peppering this with a little bit of the key of D, because that's the 5 chord from the key of D. Right? Another way of looking at it, an example I like to use is, imagine the islands of Hawaii. There's many different islands, you know, Oahu and Maui and, you know, Kauai and whatnot. When you're on these different islands, you may say you're on the island of Maui. Yes, you're on the island of Maui, but you're still in Hawaii, right? Hawaii, there are several islands that compose the islands of Hawaii. Okay, so you're in the state of Hawaii, but you're on the island of Maui for that particular moment. But then you might fly over to the island of Oahu, and then fly over to the Big Island, and fly over to Kauai. So you could be in these different islands, but you're still in Hawaii. Same thing with music. We can move to different key centers for a little bit, but still be in our original key. All right, so that's dominant motion. We can precede any chord with its dominant chord. Let's say we're going to do something very simple, like just go from up to the 4 chord. So this is just C to F, right? Now, what would be the dominant 7th chord that would precede F? Well, I told you there were 2 ways. One way is to figure out the 5th note of the F scale, and that would be C. But the other thing I didn't tell you is that you can also just go down a 4th. Right? Whichever way is easiest for you to think about, that's completely up to you. For me, I know what down a 4th is, so I just assume to think down a 4th, and that's a C. So I make a dominant 7th chord on a C, so I have C, C7, F, C, C7, F. Okay? So you can hear by throwing in that dominant, it adds a nice, strong motion to the F chord. Let's say that I want to get to the G. Well, what would be the 5 chord getting to G? Well, that would be D. So say I wanted to go C to F to G. Okay, well, I could do C, F, D, G. See how I threw that D7 chord in there? I did this. So imagine I'm doing... this would be a great example. Let's say I'm doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So now I have 1 measure of C, 1 measure of F, and 2 measures of G. Well, that 2 measures of G starts to sound, you know, kind of, you know, long. You know, it's boring to play G for that 2 measures. So let me throw in the D in front of it, the D7. Sounds great. All right. Now, there's one thing that I haven't explained to you yet, and that is all of these chords are dependent upon the melody. So that means that, let's say that your melody note was an F. Well, you know what? Playing an F on that D7 is going to be pretty tense. Okay. The beauty is on the dominant chords, you can get away with playing a lot of different notes because they are dominant chords can accept a lot of different tensions, all right? But still, if it sounds wrong with the melody, then you probably shouldn't play it, okay? But if you're creating your own progression, well, hey, you know, you can write the melody around the chord. All right, so that's dominant motion. In the next chapter, what we're going to do is we're going to pick up where we were just talking about with those slash chords. So stay tuned.